Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, professor of Brazilian history and culture at Brown University and the national co-coordinator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is supported by the Washington, Brazil office. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the immense pleasure of interviewing Debora Diniz. She is a Brazilian University professor, human rights activist, documentarist, and a public intellectual. Diniz served as a professor at the University of Brasília for almost 20 years. She is the founder of Instituto de Bioética, an organization that specializes in the use of video and research for evidence-based advocacy, policy change, and strategic litigation on health and rights. Diniz served as Deputy Chief Executive Officer of Fòs Feminista between 2018 and 2023, which is an international alliance for reproductive justice comprising over 220 organizations in more than 44 countries. Her 2016 book, Zika, From Brazilian Backlands to Global Threat, was awarded the Jabuti Prize Book Prize and has since been translated into English and Japanese. As a video creator, her films have received over 80 awards and have been exhibited at festivals, prisons, universities, schools, hospitals, laboratories, courts, and churches in over 35 countries. She was nominated as one of the Foreign Policy magazine's 100 Global Thinkers, and in 2020, she was a recipient of the esteemed Dan David Prize, and in 2024, the honorary degree at the University of Ottawa. Deborah, welcome to Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you, James. Thank you for having me.
We're really excited to talk today. There are many things I want to get to, but let's jump right in. First of all, Deborah, you decided to leave Brazil after the election of Jair Bolsonaro. Could you tell people a little about your experience of self-exile in recent years?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to thank you, James, for taking care of me during my first years in the United States. My years as a visiting researcher at Brown were crucial to me. And I'm still in the US. I haven't moved back. And that decision of not moving back and staying in the US, it's also connected to what happened. And I'm going to tell you this story as if the casualty of the risk were caused by my academic and advocacy work, which is not, right? But everything is so brutal that we also lack the capacity of telling stories without transforming the victim in the cause of the hate. So as you said, while Bolsonaro was running for elections, the group that I coordinated at that moment, we proposed a legal case at the Brazilian Supreme Court to decriminalize abortion in the first 12 weeks. So as the coordinator of this strategy, I was the public face of the court case. The court called for public hearings, and I was one of the experts nominated to speak. So I've been calculating the magnitude of abortion for several years, and I was basically there to present my academic work. That was the moment when everything started. The threats were, really very serious. They were made against me, my family, the university, the chancellor, my colleagues at the university, and even to the police who opened investigations. And there is a short documentary that was directed by Open Democracy and John Willis that basically tells that story that I'm telling you now. So over the past 6 years, I've been, relentless in investigating and suing those who have made serious threats against me and my colleagues. I've accumulated more than 20 cases, which demands significant time and a huge legal team, financial investment, and emotional labor to move forward these cases. But I'm convinced that we must build archives to remember and to ensure that someone will tell that story in the future. So just to conclude your question is that my situation, I think, is different from the others who also suffered attacks and threats during Bolsonaro running for election, because the risk is more diffuse and relates to a moral issue that is not bound by the constraints of national politics. I'm connected to the Supreme Court, timing to rule the case. So while the case is still pending, I would say the vulnerability at least is there. So I'm still under federal protection as part of the National Program of Human Rights Activists Under Threat in Brazil, and also in the Scholars at Risk initiative here in the United States.
Well, first of all, we were really proud to have you at Brown University. We're still very happy that you're able to share your amazing knowledge and your career with people in the United States. Let's step right into a recent controversy, because the Brazilian Congress tried to harden Brazilia's abortion law, increasing sentences for women who interrupted their pregnancy, even in cases of rape and a threat to the mother's life. This was met with a strong opposition in society, mobilizations in the streets. What does this process tell us about how Brazilians see abortion and women's rights?
So abortion is illegal in Brazil. And let me be really clear. A girl, a woman, or any person who has an abortion can go to jail, can be sent to jail. There are just 3 exceptions to the criminal sentencing: in case of rape, when life is in danger, and in case of a serious fetal malformation, that is anencephaly, when the fetus has no brain. So
Just
the
ask you a
criminal
question.
law,
So for incest, there's no provision for incest. If a father has sex with her daughter, that's not basis?
no, it depends if you are able to classify as rape, right? Because this is the core of the current discussion. Because in case of incest, that is a domestic rape, the victim, usually the girl, will arrive in a service late, I would say late in the pregnancy. So basically the new bill that is under discussion at the National Congress is proposing a time limit to access abortion in case of rape and incest. But also the bill is proposing 20 years in jail for the woman who had an abortion and 10 years for the rapist. So I'm not here discussing criminal law or if the criminal law is just or not, but I'm just showing you the absurdity of this proposal. So, but your question is why? What is happening in Brazil now that as President Lula said, insanity was proposed? Because this year is election at the state and municipal level. And the congressmen, and most of them, James, are men, backed that bill on increasing the barriers to access abortion would elevate their political capital for the election. The bill sparked a strong reaction from civil society. And what I mean by civil society, it's really artists, ordinary people, feminists, celebrities, all of them expressed their indignation. So, and the new generations in Brazil, I would say in teens and young women, are much more open to discussing the decriminalization of abortion. And there is now a national campaign that is named Not in Jail, Not Death for an Abortion.
You wrote a book recently in 22 called Feminist Hope, on the possibilities of political action for women. Could you explain to our readers a little bit more about the book, what brought you to write it, and what are the main points that you tried to make in the book?
Really, thank you for this question, James. It's very generous from you. The book was written in partnership and co-authorship with Ivone Gebara. She's a Catholic theologian and a philosopher. And she's part of a small group of women of faith and religious leaders that are speaking up against this bill. And before moving to the book, let me just tell you more about her. In the 90s, she was punished by the Catholic Church for speaking out about abortion. And she was sent abroad to live in silence for 2 years as a punishment for speaking about abortion. So the book begins with our discussion of feminist theory. I'm a secular scholar, while Ivone is a Catholic, and we need to remember that Brazilian society is evangelical or Catholic. So the concept of hope is deeply rooted in the Brazilian thinker, Paulo Freire, who is well known in the United States as well. And hope is not optimism. Hope is an effect, but it's also a political drive connected to concrete dimensions for transformation, concrete conditions for transformation. So we organized the book by verbs. We named the 12 verbs as feminist verbs. We began with the verb to listen, and we ended with the verb to disobey. I don't know if you agree with us, but we must all learn how to listen, which is not the same as to hear, which can be purely mechanical. And we explored verbs like remember, to witness, to speak out, and as I said, to disobey. So the book is not a dialogue between we two. It's like a wave of thinking about the same verbs from a secular and religious lens. And the impact of the book in Brazil was really beautiful, if I can say in this way. And I think that it is also a result of our differences and our capacity for dialogue. And there is also an intergenerational meeting between us. Yvonne is 82 and I'm 54.
And possibilities of the book coming out in English in the future?
Oh, I hope so.
I would love to see that happen. And if you need any help in thinking about how to make it happen, please talk to me about that.
Definitely I will.
So for the benefit of our foreign viewers, people who may know something about Brazil, who listen to our podcast, could you provide a brief overview of the women and feminist struggle in Brazil today? And I know that's very complex, but just to give people a sense of where the women's movement is, where it came from and where it is today.
I'm convinced that our racist colonial past shaped the political agenda, and it's quite similar to what is happening in the US. As in the US, decriminalization and access to abortion are a top priority, because it's about keeping girls in school, it's about women in the labor market, it's about families and the future. So Brazil has recently described by the Minister of Women, Cida Gonçalves, at the Conference of Women in Geneva, as having an epidemic of pregnancy among girls. This means that girls are permanently at risk of being raped. Most of them suffer incest, as you mentioned at the beginning, violence at home, and the perpetrator is someone from their family. Brazil has one of the most advanced comprehensive criminal laws on violence against women, Lei Maria da Penha law. So what we need is a bold political response to the situation. When it comes to political participation, we are one of the worst countries in Latin America where it comes to gender parity in politics and power positions. We trail behind Mexico, Argentina, Ecuador, Bolivia. The Brazilian National Congress, James, has a mere 20% of women, and many of them were connected to an old way of doing politics. They voted in favor of the new bill that we have just discussed about imposing barriers to women and girls to access abortion in case of rape. At the Supreme Court, just to give you another example, we have just one justice in a group of 11. So when it comes to the urgent agenda of environment, for example, and health crisis, women are once again the most affected. The recent floods in the South, the environmental activists under threat in Amazonia had women at the center of the risks and responses. Brazil was the epicenter of 2 health emergencies in an interval of 5 years. There was Zika and COVID-19. And in both situations, women, the most marginalized women of reproductive age, were disproportionately affected compared to other countries.
So would you say that if someone asks you what the status of the women's movement or the feminist movement thought in broad terms, I know it's a broad category with many different kinds of articulations. How would you explain to them where organized women are acting, or where they're at the forefront of activism in favor of women's rights, gender rights?
Yeah, so you said something very important in the end. The feminist movement and the gender rights are connected in Brazil. So if you go to Brazil and Argentina, the inclusive feminist movement is the boldest one. So it's a trans-inclusive movement. And if you go, for example, to the response to this new horrible bill, it was a expanded, I would say, women-sensitive response. So we do have the feminist movement leading the response with the campaign that I mentioned, you not in jail and not death, but also it's a broader understanding about gender equality, about bodily autonomy. So that language started to circulate in Brazilian society, and it's really something that I would say that is a backlash against Bolsonaro's tenure in the government. At the same time that we have this male-driven politics that is not just in Brazil, and we see now in France, and we see, in other countries. At the same time, we have a different, diverse feminist movement, and mainly led by youth and Black women.
So the Bolsonaro administration empowered a very conservative, sexist view about government and society. How would you assess this impact, and how much of it has been countered by the new government?
Yeah, you're right. And the facts of his administration and political views, because it's not just about his tenure, will last longer than his term. So it's the same with Trump in the United States, right? In the first 4 years ago. So my immediate response is that it's difficult to a new government to change it immediately, just being in power. And I can try to give you at least 2 reasons. The first one is that sexist and racist views are ingrained in Brazil. There is a lack of political vocabulary or a lack of bravery to include gender issues as part of the politics, as other issues are. Abortion is commonly and wrongly described as a cultural issue, a moral war, or an identity politics. Abortion is taken by politicians as a dangerous topic that can cause backlash in unstable scenarios. I really don't like this concept of backlash, because just a parenthesis here, because I think that we, women and gender diverse people, LGBTQI movements, we are the backlash against sexist, patriarchal, past and older. So abortion is not, I need to repeat that, abortion is not about a cultural agenda. It is about the most vulnerable women, girl or person, who is put into risk for the criminalization. And in Brazil, it's Black women, rural women. So like in the US, the most affected population are the Black, Latina, or migrant women. So guaranteeing access to safe and legal abortion is about equality. It's about health. It's about bodily autonomy. It's about dignity. It's about the foundations of a democracy. And I think that is the reason that the Argentinians called the abortion law reform, that it changed the legislation in Argentina in 2020 with the Green Wave movement as a democratic debt to women. So the second reason to conclude is that this is a global trend, James. And look what is happening in the United States after Dobbs, or what Macron had to anticipate, changing the constitution, including abortion as a constitutional right, due to the rise of the far right in France.
In your assessment, you mentioned something I think is very interesting, which is that Black women in Brazil are really at the forefront of much of the action that's happening. Could you explain that more and give our listeners more of an understanding of that process and why that's happening, and why that's so important for Brazil?
Yeah. So let's go to that response connected to reproductive justice. Black women in Brazil, since the beginning of the liberal feminist movement in the 70s or 60s, if I can put a magic date, they have been saying it's not just about abortion. It's about access, but it's also about contraceptive. It's about raising my children, and it's about not being killed by the police, but brutality. So their understanding of what we can call reproductive justice and reproduction of life was broader than the white liberal feminism from academics or in the past, the organized feminist movements. So with this new wave, the green wave in Latin America, Brazil has one of the most diverse feminist movements in Latin America. And I'm not exaggerating telling you that, because we do have the complexities of Brazilian inequality at the center of the alliances, as I said, with the trans movement, with the Black feminism, with indigenous women-led platforms, and also with this tradition of the macho culture in Brazil. So at the same time, that is challenging to deal with such a complexity, we truly create an intersectional movement at the forefront of the demands for change.
When I came to Brazil the first time in the 70s, a friend of mine had an unwanted pregnancy. It wasn't based on rape or incest. And because of network, she was able to go to a clinic in Pinheiros, go to a doctor, and have an abortion. At the same time, I knew women, including a person who worked in my house as a cleaner, who had had 7 abortions in her life. And all of them were precariously done, sometimes with folk medical ideas of how to abort or other ways. Could you elaborate a little bit more on this class, this racial divide in the area of those people who don't want a pregnancy for whatever reason, and yet have to resort to a clandestine process of abortion in order to terminate an unwanted pregnancy?
So my response will be specific about Brazil, but everyone can also think about the same reality in the United States. So when you use criminal law to regulate what is a health need, the result is impacting on the most marginalized people, the most marginalized communities. So the criminal law will not change a woman who is seeking an abortion. What it will make? Just a risky procedure. So if you have money, if you have access to information, if you have a passport in Brazil, or if you know how to cross the border to Argentina, if you know how to speak Spanish, you cross the border and you get a safe and legal abortion in Argentina. You know how to get the pills. I don't know if you know that, James, but now the most used method in the United States, that is the medical abortion, that is using pills, it was discovered by Brazilian women in the 70s and the 80s. They read, the pills brochure about looking to what kind of medicine was not recommended for a pregnant person because of the risk of having an abortion. So Brazilian women who discovered misoprostol as the medical abortion, and they do not have access. So if you have money, information, or you know how to cross the border, you go to Argentina, you are not even, committing a crime. But if you are an ordinary Brazilian, a common Brazilian, then most of them, they do not have my color. They are not in the same social class as me, as an academic. They are Black, they come from, the urban areas. They would take the risk of buying fake pills, of going to a risky clinic. So the magnitude of abortion in Brazil is that at least 1 in 7 women will have an abortion at the age of 40. 1 in 2, James, will have before 19. And when it goes to the difference between white women and Black women, for every 10 white women, 15 Black women will have an abortion, and in conditions of unsafe conditions for getting an abortion. So it's a matter of being youth, so a matter of age, class, and race.
You mentioned the current Minister of Women's Rights in Brazil, and what she's doing. Not to undermine anything that she is doing or criticize her in any way. If tomorrow she decided she wanted to step down and they appointed you the Minister of Women's Rights, what would be the 3 first things you would try to make happen? This is an unfair question. I didn't kind of prep you for this before, so just...
No, James, let's just make it a funny moment here in a very serious conversation. They will never nominate me. But during the nomination, my name circulated. It's interesting. And the reaction when my name circulated a year and a half ago, immediately the response was, that one that defends abortion cannot be in the cabinet of Lula. So the response will be, I will not last at least 24 hours, because I'm well known for working on a sensitive issue that is abortion, right?
So explain this to our listener, because it's very confusing. I mean, the Democratic Party in the United States, which I would say is in general much more conservative than the Workers' Party, which has support of maybe 30% of the population. It's a mass-based party. People love to wear red shirts and carry red flags and go to demonstrations. Why is it that the Workers' Party, which should be clearly and unconditionally in favor of abortion rights, as is the Democratic Party in the United States, which is much more conservative, what are the obstacles? What's going on here? Why doesn't it take hold as a part of the agenda, a progressive agenda in the country?
Yeah, it's a very important question, because it's the confirmation of Brazilian politics and the huge participation of churches, evangelicals and Catholic. It forces any progressive president. It's not just about President Lula, who himself made some moral commitments with evangelicals about abortion, to navigate and to be in power to put abortion as part of the negotiation. And that was and the strategy of those politicians that thought at the beginning that proposing a new bill to make even more, difficult to women and girls to access abortion, they would, make their political platform, and they failed. So the point is that Brazilian politics is really, I would give the first response, is in a very immoral way connected to religions, Catholic and evangelicals, and everything related to gender. It's not just abortion, everything related to gender, including using bathrooms for trans people. It's a political thing in Brazil at this moment because of this moral negotiation. But the second one that for me is the most important is for a misunderstanding of progressive men and Brazilian politics that keep saying that abortion and gender issues are moral issues. No. When abortion is decriminalized, it's about the most vulnerable woman. It's about keeping her in the labor market. It's about making her family safe. It's about taking care of her kids. So it's since the beginning about poverty and class, something that is in the agenda for progressive politicians in Brazil. But I think that my final conclusion is that sexist views, misogynistic views, are also part of the mindset of progressive politicians in Brazil.
This is very unfortunate because we would hope to think that was not the case. The other thing that I think is very interesting, and maybe this will be our final question, is that the trends in the 18 elections when Bolsonaro was elected was to see a gender divide. Many younger boys, men, were attracted to Bolsonaro and his politics, and for many reasons, which maybe you can give us some insight into, found his politics much more appealing than that of the progressive agenda of the left. Could you kind of talk a little about this gender divide?
Yes, Brazil is a key player in this gender divide, but it's a global phenomenon, right? James, you can see in the US, Europe, India, but we are kind of, I would say again, a key player. Brazil has that deep macho roots in family composition and politics and power representation. The tenure of the former President Bolsonaro saw a resurgence of these roots, which had been under revision in schools, public spaces, and social media. Bolsonaro brought back sexist language that had been considered at least intolerable. But the macho roots have a broader target. It's not just about women, it's about gender, as you said. The hate against gender diverse people, LGBTQI people, trans people is intense. Brazil is one of the countries that kills the most trans people in the world. So young men are very vocal about what they consider that they lost as privileges. They also operate with a sense of duty. They must move Brazilian society back to what they call traditional past. Let us not forget that the term gender ideology was first created by the Catholic Church in Peru and has since then been used as a moral panic in many places, including in the United States. So in trying to understand this young male generation, we need to be careful to avoid just seeing them from the perspective of being melancholic about the past. They operate with a positive side, I would say, a sense of a duty about regenerating the country, regenerating the Brazilian society. And finally, as I said before, Brazil is also notable for the strong presence of evangelical male leaders in politics. And I would say that the religions in political power are mainly evangelical fundamentalist. And I'm not judging the faith of people. What I'm saying is that this is instrumental use of religion to colonize politics and disseminate fear about gender.
Deborah, do you have any last word of something that you felt that you wanted to commit to or transmit to our listeners that you'd like to share with us right now?
James, I would just express my solidarity to this intense moment in the United States with elections, and in particular to women and LGBTQI population, because I know how intense the next months will be. But I think that we have a transnational learning and solidarity that we need to put in place.
Deborah, I just can't tell you how much I was so happy to receive you today. I remember your being at a conference we organized at Brown on the threats for democracy in Brazil. And I remember your beautiful, beautiful presentation there, your wonderful energy. We're really proud to have you connected to Brown University. And unfortunately, you cannot go back to Brazil at this moment, but we still stand in solidarity with you. Thank you so much for joining us today on Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the interview. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.